The patch function is one of the most important functions to master within Power Apps. It allows you to add and update records within your data source. At some point, you'll realize that the form control is a limiting factor within your Power Apps development. And you'll start to see scenarios within your application where a form control just isn't going to cut it, or you need to do some inline editing within a gallery. I like the patch function so much more than the form control that I just don't use a form control anymore. So stick around in this video as I show you a lot of the ins and outs of using the patch function, and I'll show you the cool ways in which I use the patch function. Let's begin. So here on the screen, I'm going to create a new application from scratch. Now, first of all, I'm going to show you the syntax of using the patch function. So here on the screen, I've added the patch function, a sample patch function call. Now the patch function accepts 3 parameters. So we'll go through each of these 3. The first parameter is your data source name. So let's say you have a SharePoint list or a Dataverse database table called customers. Instead of data source name, you would have the name customer or customers. The second parameter uses a function called defaults. And you use this when you want to create a new record within a data source. So first we'll cover adding records, and then later in the video we'll talk about editing existing records. But whenever you want to create a new record, you use this defaults function. So as you can see here, we have a beginning parenthesis and an ending parenthesis with the data source name in there. So in the example, let's say you've got a data source called customers, you would have it there and there, okay? So in this second parameter for the patch statement, you're telling it what row we're going to modify. Because we use defaults, the patch function knows that we're going to insert a new record into that data source. So the third parameter is going to be names of fields along with the values right beside them. So in this example, we've got a full name column, for example, and then we give it the value that we want to put into there. Same thing for phone number. Now you notice that these field value pairs are actually divided with a comma. So for each one of these that you provide, you put a comma at the end, with the exception of the very last one. So here we just have 2 fields that we're updating. So we've got a comma after the first one, but because this is the last one, we don't put a comma there. Now this third parameter is expressed between 2 curly braces. And a lot of times within Power Apps, whenever you have a beginning curly brace and an ending curly brace like this, you're typically expressing a record. So we're telling the patch function, this is the data source that we've added. This is the record. Because we're using the defaults, it's going to be a new record. And then the third parameter is column and value pairs. So let's now do this for real. I'm going to exit out of this and I'm going to go over to a SharePoint list. Now this could be a SharePoint list. It could be a Dataverse database table. It could be a SQL Server database table. And there's really all kinds of data sources that you can tie into. I would say those are the 3 more popular data sources. And most people do use SharePoint. Perhaps they don't have the premium licensing. So we'll use that as an example right now. I'm going to go over to SharePoint, into a SharePoint site, and I've clicked on Site Contents. And I'm going to create a new SharePoint list. Hey, if you're getting anything helpful out of this, a comment or even a like really helps the channel, and lets people like you know this is good content. Much appreciated. I'm going to click blank list, and for the name, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a list called customers. I'll click on the create button. Now SharePoint will always create a first column here called title. Now we could actually use that for full name for this particular list. We'll just put the full name inside of the title. I'm going to add one more column here, and I'm going to make it a single line of text. So I already have text selected here, and I'm going to click on next. And I'm going to call this phone number. Now that I have these 2 fields in this new SharePoint list, I'm going to go back over to Power Apps because Power Apps is not aware of this particular list yet. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on this little square up here in SharePoint first to get the link for this list. Now I'll go over to Power Apps and I'll go into Data Sources. I'll click on the Add Data. And down here in Connectors, I'm going to scroll down and find SharePoint. There it is. And I'm going to click on the first one that comes up here with my user account. Have you noticed when you try to learn something new, like Power Apps, it usually takes you a few months of trial and error and learning and going through the learning curve and actually learning the ins and outs of a new topic like Power Apps? Well, I have just the thing for you guys that will help you condense, let's say 6 months of struggling, going through that learning curve and condensing it down into a day or two. And I call it the Jumpstart course. And I've got links down in the description below if you're interested. Otherwise, check out all the other videos I have here on YouTube. Now, over on the right side, it's going to pull up all kinds of SharePoint sites that I've connected to in the past. I'm just going to paste in that link to that SharePoint site that I just copied to the clipboard a few moments ago, and I'll click on Connect. Here are all the SharePoint list or database tables I have within that site. So I'm going to go find customers, which is the first one. I'm going to check that off, and down at the bottom, I'm going to click on Connect. Now that I have that data source in here, what I'm going to do is go back over to the tree view pane, and I think I'm going to create a new screen now. I'll just create a new blank screen, and I'm going to move that screen up. And what I'm going to do from here, I'm going to keep it very simple. I'm going to create 2 text boxes and a button. There's the text input. There we go. There's one. And I'm just going to click on that and hit a Control-C, Control-V, copy, paste. So now I've got 2 text boxes now. Now I'm going to bring over a button. So I click on the insert and go down to button. So now we've got a place for a customer's name and a customer's phone number. Now, something we could do in here, we should probably blank these 2 out. So I'm going to select both text inputs. Over here in default, I'm just going to blank the default property out for both of those text boxes at the same time. Okay, now I'm going to select the first text box, and for the hint text, I'm going to say full name. And then for the phone number, the hint text, I'm going to put in here phone number. Now the hint text for a text input control is just a prompt really for that text input, letting them know what they should type in there. Now for this button, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to call this save. Now what I'm going to do at this point is I'm going to write my patch function inside this save button. So I'm going to click on this button here, and I'm going to add our patch function. So I have the button selected. As you can see in the upper left corner, we have on select already selected, which is good. That's where we want to put our code here. And I'm going to open up the coding window. Doesn't need to be so big. At least want to see the button there. All right, so instead of false, I want to blank that out and type in patch. Now, when I call functions within Power Apps, I create the beginning and ending parentheses there. And I put a line break. Okay, so our first parameter is going to be our data source. Now, our data source is called customers, right? So if we go over to our data sources, you see it's customers. Okay, so if I just start typing here, customers, we'll see we've got the hint here. These are the data sources that we could patch against. Okay. Now you remember the second parameter, we use the defaults function. So I'm going to create the beginning and ending parentheses there. And I'll put in a comment. Now inside the defaults function, we actually need to use our data source again. So customers. Okay, so that's the second parameter. Now the third parameter, we're going to denote with the beginning and ending curly braces. Okay, inside those curly braces, I'm going to hit Shift Enter. And now we can actually put in the field name and value pairs. So the first property, instead of using full name, we're going to make use of the existing SharePoint field called title for the full name. So we've got title. Now, instead of providing a hard-coded value for a full name, we actually want to grab this from our text input. So I'm going to get rid of our coding window here just for a moment, and we'll go look at these 2 text inputs. So our text input controls are called text input 1. Now we should probably, if we're going to reference a control inside of code, we want to give our controls meaningful names. So for text boxes, you always want to prefix your text boxes with a TXT. I'm going to say full name, enter. And then down here for phone number, we'll create the name TXT phone number. Okay. And this coincides with Microsoft's recommended coding practices. Okay. So we're going to click on the button again and go back into the coding window. We'll open this up. So here's title. Now we know all of our text inputs start with TXT. So I can type TXT. Look at that. There is full name. Now that will give us a reference to the text input control, but we need to get at the text value inside of it. So we're going to say .text to access that. Okay. And because we have another field, we're going to put a comma there. I'm going to hit Shift Enter. And now we will try to reference phone number. And there we go. We have phone number. I'm going to hit Tab, and it's going to finish out the name of that column there, phone number with a colon. And now I'm going to try to reference the other text input. I'm going to say TXT. There is our phone number. I'm going to click on that. And again, just like the line above, we need to reference the text property out of that text input control. Okay. So from this standpoint, we can get rid of the coding window there. We can run this. And, I'm going to type in my name here. My phone number, of course, is 1-800-555-1234. And I'll click on this button, Save. And you notice it grays out for a moment and it comes back. If we get out of runtime, we notice there's no little red X. You guys have probably seen red X's before for errors. I'm sort of led to believe that the code did work, but we can verify that by going back over to SharePoint. So I'll click on SharePoint here. I'll go into the site contents and we'll open the customers list. And look at that. We have Darren Neese and there is his phone number. Okay. Well, let's add in 2 or 3 more records here. Let's go in here and add in a Jane Doe, and her phone number ends with 5555. And last, let's add in a new record here for Jenny. Some of you may remember back in the 80s, there was a song made for Jenny, 8675309. And let's give her a different area code. Let's say 217. And I'm going to click Save. So that should give us our 3rd record. Now let's go back over to SharePoint and verify that all these records are here. So I see 2 records. Now if I hit F5, we should have a total of 3. Now there she is. There's Jenny. Okay, so we have 3 records. So the patch function allows you to add new records, but also allows you to modify existing records. Okay, so let me show you how to edit existing records. Well, the first thing that we need to do is we need to have a listing of those records that we currently have in our data source. So I'm going to go back to design mode. I'm going to move these fields over a little bit, and I'm going to add in a gallery to our screen. So I'll go down to layout. And I always like the blank galleries, so I recommend picking from one of those. If you want your records to go down the screen, which is very typical, you want to pick a blank vertical gallery, which is what I'm going to do here. Okay. And it's going to try to help us connect to the data source. So I'm going to click on customers here, and it should pull in our 3 records. Now we don't have any controls in our gallery because we did pick the blank one. And the reason why I picked the blank one is it tries to put a bunch of controls on there, let's say like an image, and perhaps we don't want an image. Perhaps we don't want the controls it creates for us. And if you start taking them out, you'll start seeing errors and stuff. I always like to start from a blank because of that. So I'm going to click on this link, add an item from the insert pane. Once I click on that, I get these controls here on the left side of the screen. And I'm going to add over some labels, okay, at least one for the full name or the title. And then we'll add in another for the phone number. And Power Apps is trying to help us out and knows that these are the only 2 columns there. What I'm going to do is I'm going to click on the middle of the gallery. So I know the gallery is a little bit bigger here. And so I click down near here, because if you click up near the top of a gallery, it's just going to select the first record. So I'm going to select down here, and it's going to select the whole gallery. Now I'm going to give this a border so we know exactly where it starts and ends. Okay, so there we go. Now the record height is pretty tall. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on this first record up here near the top of the gallery, and it's going to give these little dots here, and I'm going to pull this up. Very good. So now we see our 3 records. Okay. Now, whenever I work with galleries, I always like to know which one I've selected. What I like to do is select the gallery, go over to the drop-down list in the upper left corner, and we'll scroll down to the very bottom. And at the top of that, you'll find template fill. Okay, these are all in alphabetical order. So I'm going to click on template fill. And what I'll do here is I'll write a simple if statement, okay, or an if function. So capital I, lowercase f, I'll put in here a beginning and ending parentheses there. Okay, and what we'll do here in this code is we'll look and see if the current record is selected. Now, the current record you can always get at within a gallery by using this item. And then there's a property called is selected. Okay, if it is selected, then we want this to be light yellow. It's going to change the current record to light yellow. Otherwise, we'll want white. Okay. So if I go ahead and run this program here by clicking on the run button, I can click on the different rows and you can see that the individual records have a background of light yellow as we click on them. Okay. Now, probably what we want to have happen is if we click on one of these records, we want that particular row's data to appear on the right side of the screen. Okay. So let's do that now. So I'm going to get out of run mode, go into design mode. Now our gallery here, if we just click on the gallery, we'll notice that the name of the gallery is just gallery 1. Again, we probably want to give this a meaningful name. So I'm going to give it a prefix of GAL, short for gallery. And I'll call this gal customers. Okay. So we have a good name for our gallery. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to select the name of that gallery. I'm going to copy the name of it. And then for the default property, for the first text input, I'll go over here for default. Right now it has just an empty string. What I'm going to say here instead is I'm going to paste in the name of the gallery, gal customers. And I'll say dot selected, whichever one is selected inside that gallery. At this point, we have a single record that's inside that gallery. Okay. So what do we want to access in the full name text input? Well, we want to get at the title property, which is where we put it in our patch statement. So here I'm going to type in dot title. Okay. So just to review, if we go back over to our SharePoint list here, we've got title, and that's where the full name is being stored. Okay. So there we go. And now I'm going to copy what I just did there in the default property of that text box. I'm going to paste it in the other text input. So I'll click on the second text input or text property. I'm going to click on default. I'm going to paste it on top of there. But instead of the title, what we want to get at is the phone number. Okay, so we'll change that. Now I'm going to run the project. And you notice if I select a different record, it's going to give us the different data. Okay, let's go back to design mode. Inside this little save button here, we want to make sure that we go into the on select. Very good. Now, instead of saying defaults here, what we want to say instead, so I just commented that out so that it sort of takes that code part out and sort of ignores it. For now, what we're going to do, instead of saying defaults, what we're going to do is we're going to reference that gallery. So I'm going to start typing GAL. Okay, there's gal customers. That's our gallery. And we'll say dot selected. Now, when we reference, I'm gonna end that parameter with a comma. Okay. And I'm going to put that other code that we had in there before just on the right side there, comment it out. If we reference the selected property of a gallery, that gives us the currently selected record. Okay. Now, the patch statement for that second parameter expects some type of a record, and we're giving it a record. Okay. So if we go ahead and run this project, okay, so Jenny Smith is selected. I'm going to click on Jane Doe, and Jane Doe's information appears on the right side here. So I'm gonna put in here in parentheses for her full name, changed. And then I'm going to click on save. And let's see if that updates the record for us. So I'll click on the button. There we go. And you see Jane Doe changed. Okay. Then if we go over to SharePoint, okay, and we hit the refresh or an F5 key on the keyboard, we should see that that data changed. Okay. So now our patch statement modifies existing data. In the first part of the video, I showed you how to add records. How do we modify this screen so that patch statement is smart enough to know when to add a new record and when to edit an existing? So I'll show you the trick that I do here. So let's go back to design mode. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to add in a new button. And I'm going to add in a new button just by clicking on the save button. I'm going to hit Control C, Control V, which is sort of a quick and easy way of creating a new button or a new control. And I'm going to select both of these buttons and make them a little less wider. So maybe 140. Okay. Now, instead of this this button saying save, what I want it to say is say new record. Okay. So typically within my programs, when I have a screen set up like this, if they click on a record, it's going to display the data over there on the right side in this case. But there are some cases where you want a new record. So you click on, let's say, a button that says new record, or you've got an icon or an image that's denoting, hey, add a record, maybe a plus sign or something like that. Then what I want to do is set up a variable that tells our program, hey, this is a new record. Okay, so what I'm going to do on the on select for this button, I've got the new record button selected. I've gone over here, made sure I'm in on select. And then for the code, what I'm going to do is I'm going to just take out that code. Okay, and I'm going to set up a variable here. I'm going to use set here, which is the function that you use to create new variables and also to modify the values within variables. And I'm going to go in here and create a global variable GBL new record. Okay. And the value that I want to put in that variable is going to be a true value. So TRUE, all lowercase. Okay. So when I run this program and I click on the button, it sets up that new variable. So we know that we have a new record here. Okay. So how am I going to use that variable? I'm going to double click on that variable name that I created for this button. I'm going to hit Control C. Now, inside these text boxes, what I'm going to do is I'm going to check to see if that variable has been set to true or false. So I'm going to go inside this code here and I'm going to type up an if statement using the if function. And we'll check to see if that variable, so this variable that we created is a true, false, yes, no type of variable. So the first parameter of the if function expects a true, false. So that variable is a true, false. Okay, so we just say if it's a new record, it will return true here. If it's a new record, we want for an empty string to be inside that text input. Okay, and then I'll put a comma here. So the if statement takes 3 parameters. You have a Boolean value, something that evaluates true or false. The second parameter is what you want to have returned if it's true. The third parameter for the if function is what you want to have returned if it's false. Okay. Now, just like I did before with working with these text boxes, these text inputs, I'm going to select that code. I'm going to copy it because I'm going to do something very similar in the second text box. I'm going to select that second text box, go into default, and I'm going to paste it in because we're doing the exact same thing, but instead of title for this next one, we're going to use phone number. Okay. Because we've clicked on this new record, it gives us empty fields here. So then we're going to type in a new person and their phone number is 999-123-4567. Okay. I'm going to click on the save button here. Now, what's the problem if we were to click on the save button right now? Well, let's go look at the code and look at it another time. Okay. Well, the record that it's going to patch is the currently selected, which is not a new one, right? So we actually need to make use of our if statement, our if function again here. If, okay, if it's GBL new record, if it's a new record, what do we do for if we want to insert a new record? Well, we want to use the defaults. So I'm going to cut that, paste it there. If it's not a new record, then we want to use an existing record. So I'm going to take that gallery selected. I'm going to cut that, put it up there. Okay. And now I'm going to hit delete to bring that comma to the line above it. Okay. Take out some of the spacing there. Now we no longer need this commented stuff at the end. Okay. So now this is starting to look more of how we would have this in a real application. So we're updating our customers. If we're trying to add a new record, then it's going to blank them out and we're going to get a new record here. Otherwise, we're going to pull from the existing data source. Okay. Now, whenever we clicked on this new record, it sets that variable to true. Well, what sets it to false? Well, if we created a new record, we actually want to set that variable to false. So let's do that inside this save button here. I'm going to click over on the new record for a moment here. Here we actually set this variable to be true. I'm going to copy all that and select it, hit Control C. I'm going to go over to the save button and I'm going to paste this code down below. Now, how you separate lines of code within Power Apps is you use a semicolon. So I'm going to put a semicolon here to end that patch statement. And then down below, I'm going to hit Shift Enter. I'm going to paste this, and instead of setting this to true, I'm going to set this to false, because if we had a new record, we saved it, we inserted it into the data source, well, at that point, it's no longer a new record, right? So it's important that you have something like this here to make sure it's not in the new record mode, okay? And that does that. Something else that we need to do, if we're running this application, I say new record, and we have got blanked out control, so this should work. So let me type in new person, okay, just like what we were doing before, 999, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. If I hit save, it should add that new one. So it did, new person. But now that it's been, that new record variable has been set to false, see what it's doing now? It's pulling up Jenny Smith, which is the currently selected record inside that gallery. Now, what happens if I click on this new record here? Okay, everything's blanked out, but it's like, oh, I didn't want to create a new record. I want to click on this Darren guy and modify that. So I click on Darren, but his information is not showing up here in the text boxes. So I'm going to get out of run mode. And what I need to do inside this gallery is actually set that variable to false like we did in that save button a few moments ago. So I'm going to go get that code, copy and paste it over. So I'm going to click on this button now, open up the coding window, grab this line of code. I'm going to copy that, Control C on the keyboard. I'm going to click on the gallery and then go find the on select property for the gallery. So if they click on any rows in here, this code will be run, and I'm going to paste it. So if they click on a different record in here, obviously we don't want to add a new record. We're selecting a record that we want to edit. Okay. So if I click on Jane Doe, there's Jane Doe. If I click on Jenny Smith, there she is. But if I want to create a new record, another person, and I'm just going to put in some numbers there for the phone number. I'll hit save and just sort of testing this out. So what have we done here? We've used a single patch statement, one line of code to update our data source. Say, would you like a copy of this app? Well, I have a link down in the video description below. If you click on it, you can access my free resources page. So click on that link to access this file, this MS app file. Guys, for some reason, YouTube thinks you're going to like this video next. Let's see if they're right. Or you can select this playlist, which I've selected for you based on the content you're currently watching. Guys, gotta hurry, click one of them. Otherwise, YouTube's going to autoplay some other video, which you probably don't want. Thanks.